All right. Well, good morning. We have a wonderful program lined up for us today, and I will be introducing Ranganath in just a minute. But I wanted to alert you to our next two Alliance programs. The one in March will be on March 12th. We're always the second Thursday of the month at 11 o'clock. And John Howe, who is our church historian, has will be presenting a program called Out of the Garden, which will be a study on the portrait statuaries of people, both present and absent, from the Boston Public Garden. So I know he's going to get into what's in and what's out historically, and I think that will be a really interesting presentation. That will be in March. And then on April 9th, Will Brownsberger, who is our state senator and also a member of First Church, is going to be presenting a program more of his personal life of what got him into working for public service, and I'm sure we'll be able to ask him questions about the state of the state and the state of the world. But it would be interesting to hear a little bit about what led Will to make the decision to go into public service. But right now, I'd like to introduce Ranganath Nayak, who has been a student of creativity and innovation for over 40 years. 21 of those years, he worked for Arthur D. Little, whose business was creativity and innovation. And Ranganath is also the author of two books on the topic, which I'm sure he'll bring up. He's been a member of the Examiner Club since 1988. And Ranganath is also a wonderful contributor to the First Church in Belmont and many of our activities, as well as for the town of Belmont. So we're really so lucky to have Ranganath as part of our community, and he has agreed to lead this presentation on creativity and innovation. So people to mute their screens just so we don't have background noise interrupting. And then there most likely will be a chance when we can unmute ourselves and ask Ranganath questions. All right, Rang, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Good, good.
So
Yes.
thank you, Kathy. My main contributions to the church have been soup, uh, which I'm very happy to do because one of the things I enjoy as a creative activity is cooking. I'm going to talk about creativity and innovation, and I'm going to start with just by saying that I think of them as kind of the flower and the fruit of the human mind because creativity brings innovation to life, meaning to say it makes it alive, just like a flower brings fruit. And then creativity nurtures the fruit of innovation through its whole life cycle. And I will be going into that in some detail. My talk will be divided into three parts. In part one, I will define the terms creativity and innovation just so we have a basis on which to talk to one another. And having defined them, I will move on to describe what role they have played in the history of mankind and continue to play into the present. In part two, we will examine the mechanisms of creativity and innovation and what blocks them and what spurs them on. And then we'll end with a brief consideration of the role that innovation and creativity could play in the future of mankind. You able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, people are nodding yes.
So some definitions. And these are my definitions, and the purpose of definitions is just being able to have a basis for discussion. So this is not the encyclopedia or the dictionary telling you what these words mean. But the way I'm going to use them, creativity is doing or thinking something new and interesting to you. That is, you are being creative when you're doing or thinking something new and interesting to you, but not through mimicry. So, in other words, there's originality to it. You're not just doing something that you've seen before. Hello? So, and what is innovation? It's making progress in some domain of human activity on some problem that you encounter as an individual, as society. So it has a kind of practical dimension to it that creativity does not necessarily have. But the connection between the two, as we'll see, is that creativity plays a crucial role in innovation. The two are linked together. Some of the early innovations of mankind are listed here. You can see the large brain there as one of the innovations of mankind, and that's kind of an interesting topic by itself. But preceded by many things in the history of mankind, one of which was bipedality, the ability to walk on two legs, which very few mammals can do. And that freed up the hands to do tool making, among which included mastering fire and then hunting. Hunting led to a much better diet. That better diet led to a large brain, and that then led to language and social organization and art and music and so on and so forth. So throughout mankind's history, there has been innovation spurred by creativity. And then one of the ones that has interested me the most, because anthropologists and archaeologists love to talk about migration. Mankind emerged in Eastern Africa, and then within a few thousand years had spread pretty much all over the world. And I've always been interested in the question of why. Why did they spread? And of course, if you go to the professionals, they'll say it was because either there was not enough food, or there was a disaster, or there was a fight between two guys who wanted to be the boss, and one of them lost and had to move away and go somewhere else. And I actually wonder whether, for example, when humankind migrated from Alaska down to the tip of South America in less than 5,000 years, it was not a desire for adventure, that something was inborn in mankind that was always looking for something new and adventurous. And I know that kind of Darwinian theories say, no, it has always got to be connected to survival and the ability to pass your genes on. But there's now a whole new science of evolution taking place, which says that the desires of the mind can have an effect on what happens in the evolutionary process. And so it's not a settled issue yet as to whether mankind, by wanting to do something, cannot create the ability to do it in their bodies and in their minds. So one of the questions that people ask all the time is, why is creativity not more prevalent in life? Why does it die out? And all the exploration I've done is that it's our school systems that somehow manage to suppress creativity in children. Now, I know there are schools in Massachusetts that are not like that, but the wide method of education, the widest methods of education, squelch creativity in order to create discipline in class and allow a school teacher to be able to control 20 students simultaneously. But there is still, nevertheless, a domain in which creativity is exceedingly important, and that is the field of innovation. So we need to say, what is innovation? And innovation is the application of creativity to the creation of things that are beneficial to mankind or to a human being if it's not to all mankind. So there's benefit in terms of health or longevity or enjoyment or something. And when that happens, we call it an innovation. And one of the first and the greatest innovations of all time was the creation of what we call industry. Because historically, people worked as individuals and everything was one person at a time. And then somewhere in our past, we began to create industrial organization and industrial activity, among which the earliest ones were the ones I've shown here: farming. Instead of farming as individuals, we farm as groups. We bring implements to bear, such as plows, and we get the plows pulled by animals, and we are able to do things on a larger and larger scale. And that makes us more and more productive. And other examples include weaving of cloth, ship making. These are all early industries which employed tens of thousands of people, brick making in order to make houses, and then construction. Construction goes back several thousand years into the history of mankind. And some of the industries of the recent past that have launched whole industries and employed people by the millions and improved the standards of living of mankind: the railroads, then aircraft, then the motor car. And that thing on the bottom left is the refrigerator, one of the early refrigerators. And then electronics and the TV and what it has done, which we can argue is both good and bad, but on the whole, it has created a lot of employment for people. And some more, the whole finance system, why did it jump back? Including ATMs where you can get cash anywhere in the world. It made the whole traveler's check industry go bankrupt. And then telecommunications and the smartphone, which have revolutionized our way of life. So some of the great innovations of the last couple of hundred years, just something to contemplate, not to go into a great deal of detail about what they are. But we started the industrial era with figuring out how to take cotton and clean it with the cotton gin, and then how to spin it with the spinning mule, and then how to make cloth. That was one of the first big industries of the modern era, was making textiles. And then sort of in historical order, creating the electric generator and motor, the steam engine, the railroad, the light bulb, the motor car, etc. And then go over to the right-hand side, and we're coming more into the 21st century, nuclear power, mainframe computers. It's interesting to consider mainframe computers as something that used to dominate the world, and they have now become more or less obsolete, completely wiped out by chip-making technology that is able to get very powerful computers into your cell phone. The internet, the World Wide Web, the smartphone, web search, and then social media. And I put a question mark there to say, is it an innovation that has benefited mankind, or is it actually doing damage? And that's something we can debate. And my sense is it's doing more damage than it's doing good at the present moment.
Couldn't that be true for many of these?
Uh,
Some damage, some not.
Yeah, it's true for all of them. I mean, the motor car has been incredibly beneficial. I remember my wife's grandmother saying the motor car was one of the best inventions in her lifetime. She lived from the 1890s to the 1980s because it was the first time she could step off the sidewalk and not step into a pile of horse shit, because the motor car made horse transportation obsolete and it just cleaned up the roads. And she thought it was the most wonderful thing ever. Um, so there's good and bad in all of these innovations, but that's not really my point. My point is to study what exactly happens and how can you make it happen. So this is a diagram I took from the work of Arthur E. Little, and the diagram is something called the star diagram, and it's one of the ways in which you analyze an innovation and even create one. And what this does is to take a particular thing that you have, and on the left is an ordinary cell phone like emerged in the 1990s, and you say, what are the benefits it provides compared to what went before? And some of the things I've highlighted here just to be illustrative. It's light compared to the phones before it. It's easy to use. It's compact. It has a large network because you can just reach all over the world with it. And it's reasonably affordable. And then along comes the smartphone, which was, I think, the invention of Apple. And on many dimensions, it's actually worse than the cell phones that preceded it. It's not as light, although now it has become lighter, but when they first emerged, smartphones were pretty heavy and big. It's not as easy to use. It's not as compact. It's certainly much more expensive, so not as affordable. It has a large network, but most importantly, it adds two dimensions that didn't used to exist in the cell phone. The mobile computing, which I've shown on the right-hand side with a lightning bolt next to it, and then the mobile internet. So when you're creating great innovations, one of the ways to think about it is what is it that you want to add to what's already there that makes it into a radical departure from the past? And then, of course, you may have a dream of saying, I want to be able to do mobile computing, but then you have to have the ability to create something that delivers that. And that is the challenge of innovation. So where do these things come from? It's frequently problems in search of a solution. And I'll explain what I mean by that. It's sometimes ideas and inventions in search of an application. And I'll give you an example of that. Sometimes it's just plain problems that lots of people encounter, but nobody has come up with a solution yet. Like, for example, the ability to cook fast. That's a problem that was solved by the microwave oven, where you can do something in 5 minutes instead of 50 minutes. And sometimes it's just plain desire or ambition. Somebody says, I want to do something that is going to make a difference and make me rich. And I'm going to sit down and invent something that everybody wants and nobody has yet created. What exactly happens to an innovation? It goes through what at Arthur E. Little we called the life cycle of innovations. And this is going from left to right in time. And how successful you are is the vertical axis. And it goes through waves and cycles, any type of innovation. Just as soon as you're beginning to think, okay, we've got it, some new problem crops up, and you feel like you're going back to the beginning. And either you actually fail or another innovation appears at the trough. What does it call it? It's the trough of despair. And you're able to then go into the next cycle. And eventually, in a few instances, you get to success, which is reaching the very top. And this is an interesting thing to consider because it really says that innovation requires a stick-to-itiveness. which frequently people don't have or organizations don't have. They give up too easily. They just don't bring the resources to bear to make things happen. They don't put the teams together that have the ability to come up with solutions at the right time because you don't know what the problem is going to be. And at Arthur E. Little, the teams that we put together were always what we called multifunctional. So if it was a particular engineering problem, you would get somebody from chemical engineering, somebody from electrical, somebody from mechanical. You might get a chemist in there, you might get a business person in there, and that team would be charged with coming up with a solution to the problem. The problem might be, for example, a real world. General Motors once came to Arthur E. Little and said, "Can you invent a brake system for us that will last 100,000 miles?" That was at a time when brake systems lasted about 30,000 miles. And so Arthur E. Little would put together a team and see if they could figure out how to do it and do it at a reasonable price. And most often, they were able to do it. So where do the creative insights come from that take you from the trough back up again into the innovation cycle? It's prior knowledge, but typically from some other domain, and you're applying it to something new. It's trial and error. You say, I have an idea that this thing might work. You try it, it works, or it doesn't work, and you try something else. And that's why it becomes important to be associated with other people who bring different domains of knowledge to bear in trying to create an innovation. So it's prior knowledge, including other people who maybe have solved the problem before, but in some other domain altogether. Sometimes it's analogy, which I call insight, and I'll give you some examples. And then there's a grand insight, and there was a very famous student of creativity named Arthur Koestler, who in 1964 wrote the best book I know on creativity called The Act of Creation. It's a monumental volume. And he identified a thing that happens to people called bisociation, what he called the grand insight, in which you take two domains of human activity that don't normally come together, and you put them together in your mind, and suddenly from one domain, a solution appears to a problem in the other domain. And I'll give you some examples of that as well. So this is the example of the microwave oven, and I'm illustrating it here with some cartoons that my sister did for me. This is about 40 years ago, and she was India's foremost female cartoonist, and used to have her cartoons every day in the newspapers. And she did some cartoons for me for my book Breakthroughs. So this is the example of how the microwave oven was created. So Raytheon, the defense contractor in Massachusetts, had invented radar, and people experimenting with radar saw that it could heat things up. If they pointed the radar at a bird, the bird would get heated up and die. And so what's going on here? There is a scientist who's thinking radar, which was meant to detect objects, also can heat them up. There's a wife who's thinking, geez, I would like to be able to do things faster, or a cook. And there's a businessman saying, geez, I would like to make some more money. So these are three different domains, generally not in touch with one another. And somehow, in the mind of an individual, they come together. There's something called radar. It can be used to heat things up. Maybe it can be used to cook something. and a businessman saying, geez, if I can make this, I can make a lot of money. So together, from their minds comes the idea of the microwave oven. I need to go the opposite way. So there is in Raytheon a demonstration where a tiny uh, radiator of microwaves is put in front of three businessmen, and they are going to be seeing an egg being cooked. And this is all true story. I'm not making this up. And of course, what happens is the egg explodes, because that's what eggs do when you point microwaves at them, is they cook very fast and they just boil over and explode. And of course, everyone is extremely happy. And so that's the beginning of the process of creative invention. I've got my pages a little mixed up here. No, I've got it. So what happens after this stage? So you've got a germ of an idea that maybe you can use microwaves for cooking. How do you create something in which you can cook them? And the first microwave oven created by Raytheon was as big as a refrigerator is now, and it cost as much as an automobile. And certainly there was not going to be any kind of a market for that. And so someone said, look, how much can we sell this for? We're going to be selling this for cooking, so it should be approximately the price of an oven. How big should it be? It should be about as big as an oven. And the problem we have is this thing is too big and it costs too much. So you've got problems you need to solve, and you hope that your team is able to solve the problem. So what happens next? Somebody says, the people who know how to make things much smaller and much cheaper are the Japanese. And so Raytheon reaches out to companies in Japan, and one of them says, yeah, I think we have people who know how to do the kind of thing that you're looking to do, but we don't have a ready-made solution. We'll have to work on it. And they do. Raytheon and the Japanese company, which was Japan Radio Corporation, I think, work together, and they come out with a microwave oven, which is about as big as a big oven these days. It wasn't tiny, but it was small enough to fit in the kitchen. And at the beginning, I think microwave ovens were like $400 or $500, which was a lot of money, but still enough to attract people to buy the microwave oven, because there were enough people who wanted to see an innovation come into their kitchen, which would do things quickly. So what happens after you launch an innovation? Well, you either have success or failure. In other words, you get the product into the market and nobody wants to buy it. Or if it's successful, you get endless imitations, because people want to make money and they see somebody making money and they say, I can do that and I can do it better. And so it goes on and on and on until the next big disruptive innovation comes along. And I think in cooking, there hasn't been another one. Has there?
Nobody looks like they're having an idea.
Sous vide cooking,
Huh?
sous vide cooking, where you have a controlled temperature water bath. It's taken
that.
newer technology to do that well.
Okay.
Or more convection ovens, which people didn't have.
Air
So it's
fryers.
an alternative.
Right.
Air fryers.
Right.
And maybe even the Instant Pot, which creates kind of a very safe pressure cooker idea, which
Yeah.
works well too. But those are all innovations, again, in trying to make it quicker,
Yeah.
quicker and
So,
cheaper and smaller. Yeah.
yeah, they're all good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the ideas in the whole process of creativity and innovation is this thing called bisociation, which is a term coined by Arthur Kessler. And in order to explain it in words, I call it is a sort of a majestic analogy or metaphor. But the best way to illustrate it is by examples. So I have a few examples of bisociation at work. So this is the story of a guy who was called the Tyrant of Syracuse, which was a place in Greece, and his name was actually the Tyrant. His actual name was Hieron the Second, and he had had a crown made from gold, but was then not sure if he had been cheated by the jeweler with some cheaper metal mixed in with the gold. He asked Archimedes to solve the problem. Archimedes could weigh the crown, but how to figure out if it had the density of gold? For that, he had to measure the volume of the crown, which is difficult to do for an intricate shape like a crown. So what happens? Archimedes carries the problem around in his head, and this is crucial. And one day he gets into the bath and notices that the water level rises in the bath as he gets into it. And he gets the aha insight. How much did the water level rise? Well, it has got to be equal to the volume of my body that's immersed in water. And from that, he gets a general rule saying you can measure the volume of an object by submerging it in a liquid and seeing how much the liquid rises in some sort of measuring device. And that is how he solved the problem of whether that crown was actually made of gold or not. Here's another interesting example of bisociation. There was a guy named James Ritty who in 1871 became a saloon owner in Dayton, Ohio. This is a liquor saloon. Unfortunately for Ritty, some of his employees regularly stole money from the business, but he did not know which one and how much. In 1878, while he was on a ship bound for Europe, Ritty saw a machine that counted the number of times that the ship's propeller completed a revolution. I think somebody wanted to know how long the bearings last. Ritty became convinced that using the same sort of technology, he could invent a machine that could keep track of his sales. Ritty returned to the United States, and with the assistance of his brother, a mechanic, he invented the first cash register. The invention was the foundation of the National Cash Register Company. At one time, at the beginning of the 1900s, one of America's most prominent companies and with the largest market value of any company in the United States at that time.
Wow.
A business with thieving employees and a device on a ship's propeller bisociate. How different could they be? Here's further example. Formal lawns with neatly manicured grass began appearing in France in the 1700s, tended to by grazing animals or hand cut with shears and scythes. In 1830, Englishman Edwin Bear Budding was granted the patent for the first mechanical lawnmower, which mimicked a tool used to uniformly cut carpet and comprised of a series of blades around a cylinder. In other words, from carpet making to grass mowing, technology flowed. Lawn maintenance and carpet making bisociated. Here's another story that is one that I studied in some detail. Toyota's factories in post-war Japan were cramped for space and could not afford the space occupied by inventory on the factory floor. The president, Kiichiro Toyoda, on a visit to the United States, saw how grocery stores kept inventory in an attached warehouse and restocked the shelves every so often. From this was born the just-in-time thinking that made Toyota successful and famous. Once crowded factories and grocery stores, overcrowded factories and grocery stores bisociated. Of course, the Toyota story is much larger than that. They asked, why do we need material between the machines? It's because machines break down and we can't have the whole production line stop because of one machine breaking down. So you need material that machine would have created stocked up so that the remaining machines can continue to run. This brought down cost and improved quality at the same time. They then worked on improving the reliability of everything in the manufacturing system. And this is the essence of the Japanese manufacturing revolution. I have a couple more examples. So, a man named Georges de Mestral, a Swiss engineer, while hunting in the Jura Mountains in Switzerland in the 1940s, saw that cockle burrs were stuck on his pants and in his dog's fur, and wondered how they remained attached. Under the scrutiny of the microscope, he observed the hooks engaging the loops in the fabric of his pants, the hooks in the burrs. He figured out, this was really quite something to do, how to manufacture the hook and loop fasteners, and Velcro was born. So this is an instance of burrs bisociating with clothing fasteners. One of my favorite stories, which I told in Breakthroughs in some detail, is of the 3M Post-it notes, and I'll tell you the story briefly. Spence Silver, a scientist at the 3M company, could not think of a use for the new type of adhesive he had accidentally created. But he just could not let it go. It was a glue that really didn't stick. And who wants a glue that doesn't really stick? But he thought there must be a use for this. So he approached at 3M a senior executive named Art Fry, who had enough interest to say, okay, I'm going to think about this and see if I can find a use for it. And he was one of those guys who carries a problem around with him 24 hours a day. And that's crucial to this kind of problem solving. Fry was a weekly church goer, and he used to go to practice for the singing on Wednesday, and in his songbook, he would put little slips of paper and then open them on Sunday in order to be able to just get to the right page at the right time. But the slips of paper kept on falling out. And the next time that happened, it struck him, why can't I have something that sticks there and sticks but doesn't tear? And suddenly he got this insight saying, I can use that stupid glue that Spence Silver created and create a whole new product called the Post-it note, which sticks but doesn't really stick. You can peel it off. And that is how bisociation solved a chorister's problem. Let's briefly consider why the Post-it was such a hit. So here's the star diagram again. And on the left is household glue. And the star diagram for it says it's got shelf life on the bottom, it's got bond strength, it's got breadth of use, ease of use, And safety, it's non-toxic. What about 3M's glue? It's inferior on all those dimensions, but it's got something else. And what is that something else? Is that it doesn't stick. And who would have thought that that was a benefit, but it turned out to be a benefit? My slides keep going in the wrong direction. So this is my last bisociation, and it's a joke, and it really is meant to be a joke because one of the bisociations that Arthur Kessler loved was the pun. So how many of you can guess? Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana.
No,
You
I'm
get it?
laughing. Yeah.
Yeah. So by association at work in creating humor. And I'm coming to the end of my presentation. So when does bisociation happen? The person who wants to solve a problem is what I call at the frontier, at the cutting edge, where nothing obvious is going to solve the problem. So that person, he or she is searching, has a deep attachment to the problem, carries it around with them 24 hours a day. So the solution can pop up at any time by anything that you're seeing or a conversation you're having. There are people who have, mathematicians who have solved problems just as they were walking down the street. It suddenly comes into their head because some connection happens. But in general, for this to happen, the individual in whose mind bisociation happens has to have both breadth of interest and a depth of knowledge. And in my fanciful days at Arthur D. Little, I used to say, you can't be a jelly bean, which is nice and rounded, and you can't be a carrot, which is narrow and deep. You have to be like a mushroom, which is both broad and deep. And one of my friends said, a mushroom is what you bury in horse shit and keep in the dark. So I had to change my analogy. So I want to end with what is it that blocks and spurs creativity. So the blocks are old-fashioned education, meaning to say, think like I think, get practical and get things done fast and answer the questions that I have for you. Second thing is dogma. This is the right way to do it. This is the wrong way to do it. And then most of all, whenever you're trying to have a creative idea, criticism is the best way to kill a creative idea. And in fact, Walt Disney he used to have creative thinking sessions in which criticism of an idea was absolutely not allowed. The idea could be as stupid as the person wanted, but it would get displayed on the wall on a sheet of paper. And you would have a creative thinking session in Disney's world, then take a break, and then you would have a critical thinking session in which people would criticize their own ideas, saying, no, that's kind of stupid, let's take it off, it doesn't really work. So there's a way to manage the whole process of creative thinking that Disney really spent a lot of time on, so his stuff is worth studying. And then what are the things that spur creativity? The challenge. It has to be difficult, but not too difficult to the point where you just give up. It needs devotion, that business of carrying the problem around for 24 hours as you try to solve it. It needs a lightness of mood so that your mind is open and it lets the lightning strike. And you're kind of roaming the universe, looking around to say, what can connect to this little problem that I've got? Arthur Kessler also felt that there was a huge connection between humor, which he considered to be incredibly creative humor, and other forms of creativity. In other words, if you adopted a slightly humorous outlook, it might spur your ability to be creative in other dimensions. And then finally, just the joy of doing something new. So, the big question for everyone to talk about and consider, what are we going to do about all the problems we have? It's kind of interesting, that we cycle through ups and downs. You could go back 15 years to the time of Barack Obama, and everything looked kind of rosy. And here we are in the time of Trump, and everything looks like it's pandemics and ocean level rise and climate change. But in fact, mankind is faced with some huge problems going into the future, independent of politics. And the question is, do we have the ability to take creativity and innovation and put it to use to solve these problems? I know that there are scientists at places like MIT who are absolutely convinced that the problems of too much carbon dioxide and global climate warming and so on can be solved. And there's a big part of the world that is convinced that they cannot, and that we better begin to accommodate ourselves to a somewhat dim future. I myself am an optimist, and I think we can, but we need to get our political climate right to the point where at least we acknowledge that these problems exist and they need investment of resources in order to solve the problem. So with that, I will end my talk and open it up to discussion.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Ranganath. This was absolutely fascinating from a lay person to just have the clarity, the really interesting examples. I just loved it. And as everybody gets back to our big screen and begins to unmute themselves so they can ask questions, I want to remind people that next month, March, we'll be having John Howe on portrait statuary in the public gardens, and in April will be Will Brownsberger. And there will be on the events on the church webpage, there'll be an opportunity for you to register, which just means you put your name and email address in, and you will be sent a link to it. So be looking forward to that and put those dates on your calendar. And I want to open it up. Ranganath, I think you pretty much can see everybody on the screen at this
I
point.
can see everybody, yes.
So I see Jean's going to start, but we can just go whatever works. Jean.
Ragnar, absolutely fascinating. I love this. So much to think about. I know I don't know if you want to get into the discussion of AI is a whole nother thing. But I wanted to ask you about right now the siloing of innovation in that we aren't sharing because if there's this capitalistic thing where, one hospital wants to have the best cancer section and this, they want this, or we don't work together because there are outcomes. And, his society, have we become so siloed because there's a race to profit and how that hinders innovation, that we could be finding solutions to things if we all work together in ways. But of course, there's the profit factor, which you mentioned.
Yeah, fortunately, there's a whole world that is somewhat distant from the profit motive, including a lot of academia and a lot of nonprofit organizations that are not necessarily poor. For example, in Southern California, there's a whole neuroscience institute where a friend of mine used to work, which is a nonprofit organization, well-resourced, doing cutting-edge research in neuroscience and coming up with some pretty interesting innovations. So all is not lost. Um, and
Only if our billionaires would fund those.
yes, I know. You know, I have a thought on billionaires and why there's so many of them and why they have so much money. It's all the tax cuts we've had over the last 25 years. They have just taken money out of the public domain, which is the taxed domain, and put them in the hands of individuals. And it's just being wasted because that's the reason why the stock market is so high. Things that were worth one quarter of what they're worth now just have a ton of money poured into them without creating any kind of benefit to anybody.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Thank you.
So I don't know whether that answered your question, Jeannie.
No, thank you very much. But maybe someone's got a question about AI, but I will let others speak because
To go back to the notion of creativity and education, there are school systems that include creativity. And the interesting thing is that the Japanese are the most rigid people in terms of education, and it's all by rote, at least it's been for quite a while. And yet they were able to do a lot of things with creativity by looking at what others had done. Now, not so long ago, I was asked in Japan to create workshops on creativity. And one of the things I used to do is I would take two completely different objects, and my team, I asked them to create something. So it could be something fun, it could be something ridiculous, but they had to make something, uh, not necessarily physically, but the example I gave them was for the musical cards, where uh, you you had cards, I mean greeting cards, and that made music. And you'd be surprised at the number of things that the people created. So that was given to teachers. And in educational systems, uh, some educational system allow for students to criticize.
So,
And
Nicole, one of my observations in Japan, because in my book Breakthroughs, we had a couple of things that were Japanese in origin, including the Walkman, which unfortunately died,
yeah,
and the compact disc, which the Japanese significantly helped in creating. The creative process in Japan has something that much of the rest of the world doesn't, which is the ability of people to work together in teams to create something which can be critically important if a problem is complex enough. I mean, that's one thing that much of the West does not practice is teamwork. And the Japanese have always emphasized that. And you see that at work in many of their most creative companies, like Sony. Sony in the 1950s was the one that brought you the pocket radio and so on. Is the ability of people to work together was very significant. And that's just fundamental to how their society works.
it starts in schools because the teachers having 44 students, they end up making small teams of desks of 4 or 6 people at a time. And these kids work together. And they work also at cleaning the toilets. There's no such a thing as a bad job. And unfortunately, we demean certain types of jobs here. You can create anything, but I find that very often we demean work. So,
Let's stop doing it.
well, for example, every child needs to create music. every child, or to create art. You don't have to be a Mozart, but every child can. And I remember when my kids were fighting, so I'd sit in the middle of the piano and start one little tune and the next one would continue and they stopped. And when our son started kindergarten, he went to school and he made a little piece of music for his teacher, and she called me saying you shouldn't encourage your child to lie. He didn't do it. He couldn't do it. And
Nicole,
why?
could we just see if anyone else has something, any questions? Yes, Jim?
Well, I worked at Polaroid for 10 years, and Dr. Land was quite the innovator. I think he came up with the idea for an instant photograph when his granddaughter asked why she couldn't see one right away. And he used chemical engineers to come up with the solution. And his basic research team were not male scientists, they were women who came from the seven Ivy female colleges who had didn't have a scientific degree.
Hmm. So what happened, Jim? Why did Polaroid die out? Because they got too preoccupied with their one thing, or?
Yeah, I think that was it. They missed the digital breakthrough that changed it all.
And the same thing happened to Kodak, right? Kodak actually had the digital technology, and they thought it would destroy their money-making operation in film. And they
Well,
kept.
Kodak also mimicked Polaroid, and they lost what the like whatever you call it, and they ended up having to pay Polaroid. I think it was almost $1 billion, which kept Polaroid going for a while.
Anyone else have a question, or we can?
Yeah, I have a
Yes,
comment.
Ken.
Richard here.
Oh, Richard, sorry.
I loved your presentation. I loved learning the new word by association. And it ties in with my grandfather who worked at Bell Lab, where they had people of different disciplines across the hall from one another, helping to invent, transistors and solar panels and even working on radar and everything. And I love the fact that these innovations are not successful unless they get adopted. And I'm reminded of something that was once said about the ordinary kitchen stove that people were very disgruntled because it pulled them away from the hearth where you would tell stories while cooking the meal and everyone was together. And when the stove came about, then it pulled people in two different directions. They either were staying warm or they were cooking a meal.
Interesting.
I'm Ranganath. I have
Yeah,
a
Ed.
question.
Yeah.
I just wondered if things like copyright and patents are, do they promote innovation because they encourage the inventor to be rewarded by what they do, or do they inhibit it because the ideas don't belong out in the common domain, but they belong to the person that wrote them down?
I think they have both effects, Ed, in my observation. But it's interesting that when someone has an innovation and then builds a fence around it through patents, it invites other people to try and figure out a way around the patents and be creative in doing so. And they're often successful in doing that. But sometimes they're not. I mean, like pharmaceutical companies nowadays just have an army of lawyers and a ton of money that they spend trying to make sure that nobody else can compete with the billion-dollar product that they've just brought to market, like, say, Ozempic. I'm sure that that company has spent a mint on making sure nobody can compete with it. But patents can work both ways. If you have a great idea and you can't patent it, it means you'll get mimics within 6 months and you'll never make any money out of it. And so your motivation for putting a lifetime into creating something is really lost. Because people will often work 15 years on something before they come up with a great idea, and then they want to make money out of it.
Mm.
And the patent system is something that encourages that.
It should be noted that the World Wide Web was invented by a Unitarian to be a free access way of sharing information, and it certainly got very profitable for a number of billionaires.
Is that really true? Who was
That
the
is
guy?
true.
Tim Berners-Lee was um, living in Lexington and going to the Unitarian Church there.
Wow.
Mhm,
I knew the name, but I didn't know that he was a Unitarian.
Oh, wow.
mhm,
Cool.
mhm.
But to tie that into the previous comment, he also didn't copyright it or patent it.
Yeah.
That was free.
Yep.
Kathy, you have a question?
Yeah, I wondered, in particular, in relation to your work with the school in Boston that has done so well, what ideas you have about how to manage the problem of education that does not create creativity, that does not encourage creativity. How our school systems and our schools can maintain, as you said, controlling all the children in the classroom, and trying to keep them all on task, and often can really inhibit creativity. So I'm just wondering whether you have any thoughts about that.
Well, so the school system I'm working with is an elementary school in the public schools of Boston. And it just happens to have an absolutely dynamite woman as principal. And she became principal when she was 29 years old. And I met her for the first time when she had been principal for 6 months. And we decided to spend some time together for me to see if any of my insights from the world of business would be helpful to her in the world of education. And I guess they were, but that's not the reason why she's successful. The reason why she's successful is she's very determined. She's a good leader. And she managed to move out of the school all of the people who disagreed with what she wanted to do. So she finally created a team that was in agreement that they did not want the children to be sitting in straight rows and listening for 45 minutes to a lecturer. They wanted the kids to be working with each other, doing creative things, enjoying themselves while at the same time learning. And, she took her school in 10 years from being rated quite near the bottom of the Boston Public Schools to this year getting an award for the school that had improved the most and is now near the top. And I think you just cannot do without the kind of leadership qualities that are involved. Without the right leader, an organization is not going to go anywhere. Unfortunately, it's true of human beings that we want to belong in some sort of a pyramid. It's all right for Unitarians to be a brotherhood or a sisterhood and nobody is in charge, but it doesn't go very far.
What about Montessori schools? They have a operating theory that's allows more creativity than your average school. Do you have any opinion about that?
I
Those
don't.
schools?
I don't. There are lots of educators on this panel here, and maybe they can say something.
Well, I've been watching my grandchildren who go to a school like that, and they do have much more freedom in you can see in their ideas and their associations. They're really, I'm kind of impressed by it. Although I would say that they have a little trouble with discipline and cooperation. I mean, in the way that,
Mhm.
I don't know, they're a little bit unruly, and they're allowed that much latitude at school, but I think in some contexts it serves them poorly because they don't know really.
So more than that, Martha, the question is, why isn't it much more widespread, the model? It must be that
Yes,
it's difficult to implement. It takes very creative people, and there aren't enough of them.
I think that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
You
it.
know, Piaget said that it's hard to if you lecture to children, you prevent them from inventing the reality themselves. So it's challenging to be a facilitator of truth rather than lecturing, this is how things are.
But it's so fun to watch the kids when they come up with ideas and create something from it. It is inspiring, but that doesn't solve the problem of how you get into all the schools at all.
Well, I've been a public school teacher for all of my life when I was
Mm.
working, and public schools have to have certain guidelines, and there's a lot of expectations, and there's foundations, and there's a lot of assessments. And so public school teachers have lots of tasks that they need to accomplish. However, I will say here in Belmont that there was a real push that children should not be sitting in rows. They should be working together. You know, if they're sitting for 8 minutes, then you should have them up and moving around for 3 minutes before they sit back down again, especially when they're 8, 9 years old and younger. And it's really wonderful to see the focus on that kind of activity. The difficulty in a public school is that you have children who are at all ends of the spectrum, and somehow you need to make your curriculum accessible to all of them. And so if you have larger classes without support staff, that becomes a real challenge. But I do think even in public school, there is a real push to do away years ago, Richard, with the straight rows and the 45-minute lectures. We couldn't even, do that ourselves as adults, I think, at this point. We're so used to wiggling and moving and being involved. And I do think it's the amount of knowledge that teachers are expected to have the kids achieve and be tested on really does not encourage creativity. So that if there's some monumental world event, you can't just immediately change what you're doing in social studies to deal with that. You have to stick with the curriculum, and that's where a lot of the creativity on the teacher's point
I
breaks.
have a thought to add to that. The school system in Boston, the school that I have been working with, where the school got nominated for the School on the Move Award, is called the Bradley Elementary School. It's in East Boston. So if you just look up the Bradley Elementary School in Boston, on their website, you will find a talk given by the principal, uh, Claire Carney, on the occasion of their school getting an award. And it's got a little bit of explanation about why they have managed to transform themselves from an underperforming school to basically a school that is on the go. And you might get some insights there. And I think it's a combination of a very good leader who then is able to make the teachers feel like it's a teacher-led school, even though she's not giving up her leadership. But the teachers have a major role to play in how the school is run and what goes on, and she treats all of them as equals, and they come together in committees and decide what to do together. And I think that's my takeaway is that's been crucial to her success, is being the kind of leader who knows how to give free play to all of the people under her and make them feel like they are creative geniuses themselves. So it's the quality of the leadership that ends up being crucially important, but it's not leadership in like I'm the boss.
Do you think this is a kind of leadership that can be taught?
I think it can be taught. I think it can be taught.
My question is why in this country the art and the various arts are not compulsory, are not part automatically of the curriculum.
I will leave that to the teachers, Kathy and
I would just
Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, I know that at least here in Belmont, that the arts, whether it's music or the performing arts or the artistic painting and all, are part of it. I mean, the kids take music a couple times a week, art a couple times a week, and in the elementary levels. And then there's a big push on wonderful music in the Belmont Public Schools, as well as, of course, we know the drama and the uh, visual arts as well as the performing arts in the high school.
Belmont is a little unique in that respect because I was part of teams that were accredited for accreditation of various schools, and I was rather surprised.
Can we hear from the other teacher, Kathy? Yes.
I think a lot of that has to do with how education is funded in this country.
Mm-hmm.
That it's, that it's funded through property tax in general. And so that there are so many communities who do not have the resources to to um, to include those things in their curriculum because there are so many demands for the academic um, achievement. And and I think it's a tremendous drain on creativity uh, and I wish we could totally change the way, I wish that every student in the United States had, had the same amount of money. Um,
You know,
instead of being locally funded, that schools, that every student had, it was across the board per student expenditure.
a country that went through a major soul searching and turned its educational system from a Soviet style system to one of the best in the world
Cuba.
is Finland,
Mm.
which is not a tiny country. It's about 30 million people, so it's the size of a big American state. And they came together as a country in endless discussions among all the adults about how they were going to take a Soviet style system and create something more like what Singapore has or Hong Kong has. And essentially, they agreed that it was going to be federally funded, every school. They agreed on another principle that every kid was going to graduate. They would spend whatever it took to make sure that the kid graduated. And third, the schools were made very much part of the local uh, village or town so that the people who sent kids to the school felt like it was their school rather than some separate bureaucratic thing that had been planted in their midst. And the effect of that on Finland has been just electrifying. And so it can be done, but it takes a lot of people coming together and saying, let's work together to make this happen. And I think there are states in this country that are the size of Finland that have pretty good educational systems. It's not that uniformly the US is bad. There are places where things are pretty good, including in Massachusetts. Yes, Jim.
Well, at the higher end of education, I know that science and engineering schools require all students to take some liberal arts courses, and you can even major in a liberal arts class. And in 1963, I graduated from the Illinois Institute of Technology with a degree in political science.
There you go.
Very good. I think we should let people go on to and have their lunch, or in the case of Suchi and Sridhar, their sleep.
Well, I'm going to give a big round of applause to Ranganath. This was such a fun, a fun morning for me, Ranganath, and thank you for your work to make this accessible to all of us and to have such a rich discussion. And we are we are so lucky to have you presenting to us. So thank you. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thank you from online also.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye-bye
much.
Bye.
all.
Everybody be safe, be warm.
Okay.
Stay
bye.
strong.
Yep.